It's now in studio, the founding partner of the Krebs Stamos Group, Alex Stamos. He serves on the advisory board to NATO's Collective Cybersecurity Center, and he's previously served as the chief security officer at Facebook and at Yahoo. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Willie.
So let's step back and take the big view of this. There are a lot of young people, a lot of parents, a lot of content creators who are watching this hearing very closely today. The CEO of TikTok is showing up. He's going to testify and defend his company before this committee. As somebody who knows this stuff so well, what are your concerns, if you have them, about TikTok?
So like you, I'm the parent of a teenager, and I've seen how incredibly popular TikTok has become on everybody under 25 or so in this country. And I do think there are three major categories of concern. People are worried about TikTok being able to manipulate American conversation. Unlike a Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, the number one reason you see something on TikTok is the algorithm, right? And so subtly manipulating that can really change things. There's the possibility of direct censorship of voices that are against Chinese interests. For me, the most interesting thing is the privacy issue, in that one of the things that came out in this testimony is that TikTok is on 150 million phones. That's a lot of data. And as somebody, the number one thing I worked on at Facebook was internal data access controls. That was hard enough without my employees being under the physical control of the People's Republic of China. And so, most of TikTok's code comes from Beijing. It is extremely difficult for them to give any kind of guarantee as to the safety of U.S. data as long as that's happening.
And so Mr. Chu, the CEO of TikTok, has said, not only do we not give data to the Chinese government has never asked us for the data. Do you believe him when he says that?
I don't. So first, we already have proof that Chinese employees of ByteDance were able to access TikTok's data to find out information about a journalist who was writing critical stories about TikTok, right? So there's already an example of that. Now, that's not necessarily driven by the government, but the exact same functionality that would allow them to get in there. The other issue he's going to have is that over the last couple of years, we've seen a massive crackdown on tech companies in China. President Xi is the most powerful premier and general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party since Mao. He has a third term, which has not happened since Mao, and he has been consolidating power. And in doing so, he has put really powerful tech CEOs in jail. Jack Ma of Alibaba, right now, as we speak, the largest tech banker in China has disappeared. Nobody knows where he is. And so it's just very difficult for them to make the argument in a situation where that kind of power has been demonstrated by the Chinese security services that they would be able to resist any requests from the Chinese government.
So what is the practical concern, if just to bring it down to a ground level, of collecting all this data, of TikTok having 100 million Americans' data? What does that mean? What could they do with it that could be harmful?
Right. So when you think about Chinese surveillance, you have to look at the big picture. And what the Chinese intelligence services have gotten really good at is taking big chunks of data about Americans and then putting them together in useful ways. So they broke into Experian and they stole all of this data on Americans' credit profiles. They broke into Anthem, one of the largest healthcare providers, including healthcare to the U.S. government employees. They've broken into the Sabre system, which is has airplane reservations. They broke into Starwood to get the passports of people who are staying in hotels around the world. And then they broke into the Office of Personnel Management and stole the classification records of over 20 million American employees with U.S. employees with clearances. You put all that together and you can build kind of knowledge about the entire life of these people who work in classified positions. And that is an incredibly powerful functionality when you have it all together. And so TikTok by itself, yes, that data is probably not incredibly valuable. But when you combine it with all of these other things, and they have not stopped in that hacking campaign, they continue to go after large holders of data on American citizens. When you put that all together, there's a huge number of questions that their intelligence services are able to answer when they have them about American citizens, perhaps for counterintelligence purposes, but also to understand what's going on in America and to, possibly in the long run, to manipulate political sentiment. Which is one of the bigger concerns about TikTok these days.
There are a whole bunch of experts who have pointed out, okay, you want to ban TikTok? Do that. Go ahead. It's no longer available in the United States of America. But there are a whole bunch of other companies, there are a whole bunch of other apps that are effectively doing the same thing.
That's right. Yeah, this is the funny thing, is we don't really have a law in the United States that controls what data can you move to China. We do not have a privacy law in the United States. The rest of the developed world has come up with federal privacy laws or privacy laws that control what can you do with data? Where can it go? Who can access it? And so I think that is the missed opportunity here. Is yes, we can squish TikTok, and everybody can pat each other on the back for this bipartisan consensus. But in the end, there are hundreds of Chinese games, mobile apps, discussion forums, social media apps. There are dozens and dozens of potential TikToks out there, and just destroying TikTok does nothing to set a standard for how do we want companies to deal with data. So I think, yes, let's talk about TikTok, but let's use it as an example of why we need a federal privacy law to control the behavior of both American and Chinese companies.
Do you think it's going to be banned at the end of the day, TikTok?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of momentum here, and it is one of the few things that Congress can agree on. And so just to get a little bit of a win, I do think it's possibly going to be banned. How you ban it actually turns out to be a difficult question, and what kind of powers do you have to do that? Because we don't have a great firewall of the United States. So yes, Congress can pass a law that says TikTok can't operate in the U.S. The actual international headquarters of TikTok, of the part of TikTok that operates outside of China, is Singapore. So let's say they retreat back to Singapore and they offer a service to American citizens. Now what does the U.S. government do? And I think that's part of the chess moves that people haven't really thought about, is if you don't pass a law that controls all of these data flows, you end up just creating this problem with TikTok where we're going to ban them and then not really have the power to stop Americans from using it, which I just think that the administration's backing themselves into a corner here.
We're just getting some news across the wire from the Associated Press that China's government says now it will oppose possible U.S. plans to force TikTok's Chinese owner to sell the short video service as a security risk, and warns such a move would hurt investor confidence in the United States. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. Xi, again, doesn't really care that much about the Chinese tech industry except how it can serve the Chinese Communist Party. And so it would be a really bad idea for him allowed this precedent to be set. So I think TikTok is in a difficult place and that they are a pawn in a geopolitical game between the United States and the People's Republic of China.
Such an interesting story, and you explained it so well. Alex Stamos. Alex, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Willie.